Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Coffee, Candidates, and Conversation. Today we have a very special guest. She's a young lady who is running for Tennessee House of Representatives for District 84. And if you don't recognize the face yet, maybe you'll recognize the name. But either way, get acquainted with both. Her name is Miss Dominique Primer. Hello, Miss Primer. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we're so excited to have you on Coffee, Candidates, and Conversation. You have
Thank you
your
for having me.
beverage of choice. I got my SCDP mug.
I have mine.
Okay, nice. I see. Is that what's that color? Is that magenta or fuchsia? Or...
It is actually a mermaid tail, and it's ombre with pink and
Mermaid tail.
magenta.
Mermaid
Yeah.
tail is a color.
No, it's the shape with the ombre.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, that's
Hmm.
a nice mug. It really is.
Thanks.
Okay, it looks like some teas in there. Yeah, too pretty for coffee. Well, uh, Dominique Primer, I am really impressed by a lot that I've seen with your campaign, and I'm glad to learn, that this morning you have a campaign slogan or theme that really focuses on something that I think voters are looking for, and that is a way to put power back into the community. I really like that, and so let's tell the voters a little bit about you, and we're going to do it in a different way. Most times you get asked a question, then tell us about yourself. Then you get to choose, all the things that are already on your campaign platform and that people can find on Google and stuff. So we want to change that narrative. Tell us something about Miss Dominique Primer that we cannot Google or find easily on Google, that we won't learn from your campaign literature or website, and that we would likely not learn even if we work with you in a professional capacity.
I love to travel, and I spend a lot of my free time traveling. So, to date, I have visited over 25 states and over 25 countries. So, really trying to make sure that I'm exploring all that is out there that God has to offer, and make sure that I live life through experiences of other people and cultures, and just try and be well rounded.
Mm. So now I guess I'm guilty of passport abuse because my passport is bare. Goodness. Well, most exciting, well, top three destinations of the 25.
um, Cuba,
Mm.
Greece, and Austria. Not Australia, but Austria.
Austria. Okay. All right. Well, cool. Have you picked up the ability to do accents pretty well?
Not really.
Not really. Okay.
I am terrible at learning other languages. I think the most I've done was Spanish,
Mhm.
semi-fluent in Spanish, but I don't use it nearly enough to, hop in a conversation a day and speak to a native speaker.
Okay. Well, that is truly interesting. And so um, I have Freeport, Bahamas, which doesn't require a passport. Yeah, Canada, which is not very far away. So, anyways, well, that's very good to know. So let's kind of transition and give the voters a little insight in a different way. We know that life as a candidate essentially becomes the sum of what your constituents' concerns are. And so every day you're really focusing on what matters to the people you're hoping to represent. And I think the situation is the same for both candidates and for elected officials, in that we often forget that our candidates and elected officials are also voters. So let's take your candidate's hat off for a moment, set that to the side, and let's talk as a voter to voter. What issue for Dominique Primer is the single most important issue to you, or single most important issue rather, and why?
I think it has to be education. That is a space that I work in professionally, and it is also the space that I see the biggest need for support on the state level and here locally. I think we do our students a disservice when we continue to defund education, when we don't challenge the state to change their funding model so that our school districts can be fully funded. Anytime we're cutting from the budget, education is always the thing that seems to be negotiated quickly, and not really utilized as a tool for our students. And so education is the thing that helps everybody. And our students deserve to have free quality education, and just because you go to a school doesn't mean that you're getting the best education. And so I think, when we look at quality education, then we know that we have quality jobs, and that directly impacts our economy. And so, for me, it's looking at how the systems work together, and education by far is one of the systems that we have the ability to dismantle and really do some real change and some good things for our students so that they're not falling behind in the 21st century.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think that's a great way to just go ahead and dig in um, to a couple of issues. And I think the first one I'll go ahead and select out for us to talk about is one that has arisen because of all of the uncertainty caused by COVID-19 and everything, and it's really exposed another area that we have to rapidly improve in, and that's digital equity. Uh, and so, and just to kind of give a little context, we have a lot of rural areas in Tennessee, and even some inner city areas where people just can't afford internet and cable service, where folks don't have access to this unique resource, or now this critical resource that students and parents will need for the 100% virtual framework to be successful. What are your thoughts on that?
We can't expect for our students to have digital equity when they don't have equity in the classroom and education already built in. So I am not surprised that digital equity is something that we are experiencing in the midst of the pandemic, because our school systems aren't built to be inclusive of what our students really need. And if they were, we wouldn't have to have conversations about equity. We would know that it was already there. And so, even just equity in the classroom has been a huge issue in the way that we're teaching our curriculum and how students are receiving certain services and who receives those services and how resources are allocated. And so, when we look at the resources and how they're allocated, digital is a resource, right? And so, when we're looking at who has access to technology, who can afford access to technology, we don't really have the infrastructure in place here in Tennessee, whether that is in a rural county or an urban county like Shelby County, for our students to be successful because we haven't invested in that infrastructure. And so, equity as a whole, when we look at our education system, isn't just about digital equity, because we know that without our students having access to the things that they need, that they also are still going to be underperforming because a lot of our students aren't equipped to use tech devices. We know that our educators need to be trained on the best platforms that are going to hit with our students so that they can grasp their attention. We're asking for a lot of change without lack of preparation. And so, had we spent the time to invest in 21st century education, we wouldn't be looking at digital equity as something that we're having a challenge with now. A lot of times here in Tennessee, we are very reactive to the needs of what our children need instead of being proactive.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a school that had tech everywhere, and that was in the 90s. And so, in the 2000s, the same thing, but that was because of the types of schools that I was going to. And so, being in a digital learning environment, it was inevitable. And it is sad to see that we are not prepared to provide that for our students, that we should not be having a conversation about who's going to have laptops, whether or not students have the ability to perform at high levels using tech. When tech has been a part of their lives, they just haven't had access to it. And so we should be ashamed that we are not doing everything we can for our students in education, regardless of if it's digital, if it is in the classroom, if it's around their social and emotional learning. We have got to do better in terms of equity.
Hmm. Well, you just gave me an idea for a different pathway to explore as well, and that is testing. And since we don't have digital equity laid out, and so school districts have to reach that. But in the recent conversation I had, we talked about the testing model for students, and so we have on the one hand accountability, which I think that you got that consideration as the purpose for the testing. And then on the other hand, you have teaching towards benchmarks for checking off the box or meeting a standard. And so the question is, when it comes to testing, like our standardized testing for Tennessee, I think we have a TN Ready and some other platforms. What do you think about TN Ready, and does the layout equip our school districts uh, uh, with the kind of duality or balance that they need, where we're reaching benchmarks and we're holding our schools accountable? Do you see that system working, or what are your thoughts on that?
I believe that testing is necessary. I believe that we have to use some metric to know whether or not our students are on grade level. What I don't believe is fair is for the educators to be penalized when they don't have all the resources they need for their students to be prepared effectively and efficiently and to have and adequately so that they can perform at high levels. So I think it's twofold. I think yes, we should hold teachers accountable, but not because they don't have the resources that they need, but they should be held accountable because they're educators, and that the resources have to be there in order for that accountability to take place. And the benchmarks have to be there because we need to know what our students know and what they don't know, so that we can prepare them. But I do think that standardized testing, um, or what I do know of how standardized testing came to be, is that it was never designed to just be a test. It was designed to see what information was lacking, as a benchmark. And so the fact that we utilize it in today's society to say that one student is worse or one student is better automatically pits subgroups of people against each other. And I think that's where, we start to see the flaws, because if I attend a public school and it is underfunded, it is under resourced, then my ability to have high performing educators and quality instruction is not the same as someone who has an affluent background, whose parents are able to afford, test taking strategies and tips at an early age. And so, or they have a better public school option because their parents have the capacity to either travel or to afford for them to go to a different school. That our students are already in unfair territory when we look at testing. And so it's really difficult to say that we can have these things when the playing field has never been balanced or fair in the beginning. And so we can expect for all students to have to overcome so many barriers and then say, oh, well, you did well. Well, I did well in spite of all the things that, I was dealt an unfair hand at. And so, that's, I am, I am a great test taker, but my parents invested in that. I have siblings who also are not great test takers, and they absolutely have the same investment. And so you even have to think about what it looks like when students have anxiety around test taking, whether or not they have a good day. I mean, it can be so many different things, that students experience, and they just don't have a good test day. But that doesn't mean that their teachers should be held accountable for the student not, they woke up and didn't feel well, or they were late, or something crazy happened. So there's a lot of different things that factors into the test taking that we don't consider when we throw scores back. Now, in terms of 10 ready, I am not an educator, so I don't really have a stance on 10 ready. But what I have heard is that 10 ready has not been effectively deployed yet. And so if we are paying for a standardized test to be deployed and it has not been deployed effectively yet, then we are wasting money out of the state budget. And we really need to take a look at what it means to have those tests deployed and ready. Like, I mean, the name 10 ready and it hasn't been ready is like, okay. But we really want to make sure that you know, the people who are creating those tests are going to be held accountable as well for our students' lack of or our inability to test where they are.
Mm. Yeah, you touch on a lot of important issues, particularly uh, the dynamic that exists in different communities. Like the difference, stovetop versus a range, where if you're raised in the community where I grew up, range is never used in relation to stovetop, and and give me one of those little plates, or give me a small plate versus a saucer.
Hmm.
So those different reference points do make a difference, and I guess we could call it a uh, culturally biased type of framework in the way we ask questions. And so I think you touch on some critical things. And since we're diving into education, I might as well ask you one last education related question before we take a pause for the cause. And it's pretty straightforward. School vouchers, yes or no?
Absolutely not. School vouchers are constitutionally illegal here in the state of Tennessee. We cannot take public funding and send it to private schools, and so I do not support that. But I want to stress the importance of this idea of vouchers. Even in schools, when we're moving our students from school to school because we're looking for better public education options or just public options, education options in general, we have to also take into account that just because your child goes to a better school does not mean that they have a better experience. And so, understanding that if you were to pull your child from a private school to a public school in something like the vouchers program, I'm sorry, from a public school to a private school with the vouchers program, that doesn't mean that your child is going to be socially and emotionally well. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to afford all the other things that comes with being in a private school, which ranges from their uniforms, the cost of paying for the books. It's just so many other things that you have to take into account. And I say this from a space of having siblings who did go to private schools, right? Like I am a public school child all the way, but I have younger siblings who went to private schools, and the cost of tuition is ridiculous. It is basically, paying for a mortgage payment, depending on the school that you go to, but also just all the extra things that my parents pay for, because it is a different environment. And so when we're sending our schools into places that were not designed for them to be there in the first place, and understanding how private schools came to exist here in Memphis specifically, then we understand the dynamics of why their schools are better than our public schools. And if we just invest in our children in public schools, that we have the ability to make sure that public school children who look like you and I, have opportunities to be successful, just like the kids in private schools. But that the money that we're trying to pull out of public schools does not need to happen. It needs to stay in the public schools. We need to continue to invest in public schools and just do a better job there. We don't have to move the kids around. We need to hold the people accountable who fund these schools and make sure that resources are allocated appropriately and properly so that our students have the best options, the best schools, and they're in their neighborhoods. They are with people who look like them, who make them feel good about themselves, and they're not having to deal with microaggressions or macroaggressions in spaces that are not inviting.
Mm. Well, I really, really am enjoying this discussion. And so right now we're going to take a brief pause for the cause. But when we come back, we'll go into our lightning round, and we'll lay out some topics, and we'll let Dominique Primer knock them down. And so join us real quick for a commercial. It's going to provide some valuable information, and we'll be right back.
Greetings. I am Michael Harris, Chairman of the Shelby County Democratic Party. I'm here to share an important message with you today, and that message is everyone can make a difference, and one vote can be the difference. So raise your voice and vote. And remember, July 30th is the last day to request an absentee ballot. So if you want to vote by absentee ballot, be sure to go to shelbyvotetn.gov and request your absentee ballot. And remember, if you request an absentee ballot, you really need to use it, because if you decide to go to the polls after requesting an absentee ballot, you can vote, but it will be by provisional ballot, and your vote may or may not be counted in this upcoming election. So remember, raise your voice and vote.
All right, we are back. Okay, so Miss Primer, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Ready to show us how to put power back in the community? And I like it. All right. So let's jump to a topic we haven't made it to yet. I'm gonna pop it up on the screen, and I'll toss it to you, and you tell us what your thoughts are on it, where you see an opportunity, or give us a perspective that you think would be valuable for voters in terms of learning more about where you stand as a candidate on the issues. We can try to keep you're pretty efficient with your responses, but we try to keep the answer to a minute and a half. But if there's an area where you want us to take out the shovel and go deeper, you stop me and we'll do that, because we want the voters to hear from you and to learn as much as possible about the critical issues. All right, you ready? Expansion of Medicare, Medicaid. We said no to $1.4 billion. Like what? Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And so, what are your thoughts on the expansion of Medicare and how our legislature is responding to that?
I absolutely believe that we have to expand Medicare and Medicaid. I understand why we have not, why our legislators are not. They don't believe that we'll be able to afford it once the federal funding ends. But the thing is that right now we have people in Tennessee who are dying. They are dying because they don't have access to health care. And I truly believe that healthcare is a human right, that we should not just talk about, being a democracy and taking care of people, that we have to actually live by that. And that starts with making sure that the thing that is essential to your well-being is taken care of, and that is your body. And so when we're not able to take care of our bodies, we're not able to fully participate in society. And so there is a healthy young group of people who are of working age who do not have health coverage, or they're unable to afford adequate coverage when they have the various procedures or health issues come up. And we just have to do better. We have to expand it. We have to be included. At one point, I was one of the many people who did not have health insurance coverage. And had I not had relationships with healthcare providers prior to that, I would not be sitting here before you today, because it literally was life or death.
And I am now crafting a lightning question topic for you to in relation to that, because I think this is critically important to consider. So I'm about to post it now. So Tennessee ranks 7th worst in hypertension and heart disease, 5th worst in diabetes, and 3rd worst for stroke in America. And it costs Tennessee $5 billion per year. One of the things you mentioned is that, it's the budgetary argument that we can't afford it. What are your thoughts about this? And I want to throw, I know this is a loaded one, but I'm going to throw this out there. Hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, and stroke affects one particular demographic heavier than others. I think you already know what that is. So what are your thoughts about that in relation to your point about people dying and not having access to healthcare?
Health disparities are real. Unfortunately, we have people in our legislation who have not been impacted by things like hypertension, heart disease, or diabetes, and so they have no real compassion for those who have been impacted by it. We know that African Americans are the group who experiences these things the most. We also know that African Americans also here in Shelby County, um, usually are the groups that don't have health care coverage. So we know that that is true. We know that when we are not taking care of Tennesseans across the state, that that money has to come from somewhere. And so often that comes out of our taxes. And so we see, all of it is cyclical. We see spikes in the cost of various things because our state refuses to take care of its people. Now, when we look at health disparities, and I want to point this out because in the state of Tennessee, rural hospitals are being closed. And so when our rural communities don't have access to hospitals, then they are brought into city hospitals or county hospitals like Regional 1 and, hoping that they make it there in time. No one should have to wait 45 minutes to have emergency room help, to get to an emergency room. You should be able to go and get the care that you need. We have got to prioritize people's health. It is not a priority for Tennesseans, for our Tennessee legislature. It has not been a priority for our U.S. legislature, and it's sad because without the people, you do not have a democracy. And healthcare really shows us how fragile our democracy can be, and we've seen that with this pandemic. That when you don't have healthy people able to work, your economy crashes. You have to find other ways to make sure that we can still be the leaders of the world that we claim to be. But when you can't come up with reasons, adequate reasons for why people don't deserve to have coverage, it makes us look really bad, not just to the world globally, but it makes us look bad here in Tennessee because we are the worst in so many of these categories, and we just have to do better.
Mhm. And, and what comes to mind, just in thinking about that, we have communities that uh, have a lack of healthy food options, particularly in our poor communities. We have communities. I mean, recently we just had a fight in South Memphis because they had a couple Kroger locations to close,
Hmm.
and so then there was not access for a short period to a grocery store, and so now there's a store that's replaced that, has replaced Kroger, but all is still not necessarily well simply because there's a replacement, grocery store. So I think we have that dynamic uh, alongside the fact that it can be more expensive, and if not that, definitely research intensive to adjust to find ways to eat healthier. So that makes me want to direct us towards this critical question: uh, what exactly is a livable wage? And I'd like for you to address it as it relates to, one, what is the magic number to the extent there is one, and then two, does that put people in a better position to afford some type of healthcare coverage, and try and break us out too.
So I will start with saying that I served as an AmeriCorps Vista for a year here in Memphis. And for those who are not familiar with that program, it is a federal program where, in exchange for working for a nonprofit here locally, doing some grassroots work, they will, they'll pay off a school loan or something like that. But the unique thing about this particular program is that you have to work at the federal poverty level. So I was working for a year, making $7.25. Absolutely cannot live off of that. And I was living with my parents at the time. And I still felt like there was no way that I could afford to cover my own personal expenses. And the only expense I had was a car note. And it was simply ridiculous that we do not look at the cost of inflation and the cost of living and raise it accordingly. So a lot of people like to say that we need to have $15 an hour. Well, I agree that we have to get to $15 an hour, but that is still not enough. That just barely puts you at the poverty threshold. If you have a family, the numbers have been that you need somewhere between $17 and $22 an hour for you to be above the poverty level. That does not mean that you still are living or that you have a good quality of life. It means that you're just surviving with the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we are a country that says this is the place where you can be anything that you want to be. Those of us who have been here have got to be taken care of. We have got to make sure that our people have living wages. We have got to make sure that they have food. We got to make sure that they have health care, that they have quality education, and that we cannot have people who are working to be poor.
Right. I agree. Now, man, let's dig in some more then. Uh, how can we? Are there any ways to combat systemic poverty that you feel are low hanging fruit opportunities that we seem to be missing?
I happen to think that poverty is not a system, but a symptom or or an outcome of all the other systems and their interconnectedness and our lack or our refusal to dismantle or disrupt systems that were designed to marginalize groups of people like Black and Brown people. Poverty can be directly tied to education. It can be directly tied to healthcare. It can be directly tied to to housing. There are so many other systems that were created that essentially can bankrupt you and put you into poverty. So, we make choices about our healthcare. If you are diagnosed with cancer, it is literally you can be bankrupt because of your health, and that can create poverty. I think what we have to do with poverty is look at how it is, who is impoverished, and understand the interconnectedness of how the systems play out. And so when we
Mhm.
look at things like who has access to education, and when I say access, not like, oh, that's something that you might be able to have, but like really who has access to quality education? Is that Black and Brown folk? Or is it, there's a school in your neighborhood, or there used to be a school in your neighborhood, but we're not really going to put any resources into it. And so when you don't have resources um, allocated to you properly, and I know I keep going back to that, but I firmly believe that a lot of it is resource allocation.
Mhm.
And it's not just the resource allocation, but it is who is distributing those resources and deciding how they're allocated. So when you don't have Black people and you don't have Brown people who are able to adequately say, this is the problem and challenge how things are being redistributed or allocated, then you have systemic poverty that happens, right? Because we're not in a space to say, this is impacting this group of people this way. And usually, if it's not in front of you, then it's not, most people don't care about it. So if you don't have a direct connection to it, you usually just are passive about it. But I think one of the ways that we can tackle poverty is just having like real honest conversations about who it really hurts.
Mhm.
We here in Memphis, we are a majority minority community, and the majority of us are impoverished in some way, whether we're at the poverty level, under the poverty level, or just barely making it above the poverty level. Understanding that poverty comes in various forms, and that what poverty looks like to us here in America doesn't look the same as in developing countries. And so I think a lot of people don't even realize that poverty is a thing here in America because we don't, we have water, but if you look at Flint, Michigan, then you know that impoverished communities like Flint can have lead in their water and no one will care. And they still don't care here today. So the, there's a lot of decisions that are made that lead to people being impoverished. And I wish that we had it was low hanging fruit to fix it. But for me, it's really dismantling all the systems that were created that built poverty into it. And
Yeah.
so until we have people to do that, poverty is going to exist, and we've got to dismantle and disrupt the systems.
I absolutely understand. And to your point, you know, uh, I grew up poor, and I guess I'm still trying to ascend to the levels where money is not an issue. And to be honest, I had no idea I was poor until I got until I applied for college and found out how much everybody else's family was bringing in, and we qualified for every single possible grant you could get through financial aid because I was raised by my grandparents and they made so little. And now when I help my grandparents, do paperwork and go through documents and stuff, and just to think about that combined, they bring in less than $18,000 a year. And to think about the fact that my grandfather worked at a company called Kimco that was a plant that was here in Memphis. And he worked there 40 years and was a supervisor for 25 of those years. And because they didn't allow Black supervisors to participate in the pension program, he was denied access to that. Mm-hmm. And when I think about 7 years ago, he was contacted, and the company, I guess their investment company and whoever the entities were, reached out and said, "Hey, look, we're going to give you. We decided to make this pension program available to everybody who qualified, who would have qualified at the time." And so he started getting his pension, and he got $8. He gets $8 a month in the pension for a company he worked for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And so stuff like that, you can't fix that. Yeah, you can't fix that overnight. And so you have the notions of racism involved and all these other things you're speaking on. So I'm totally digging it. And so in terms of progress, I'm about to ask an interesting one now. I think it's interesting. In terms of progress, everybody wants to do a lot, and especially candidates running for office have these goals of going in and being persuasive and trying to drive the issue on change immediately. And everybody has a dream, and you ever seen Hustle and Flow with Terrence Howard, and he played this character called DJ, and he would say, everybody has to have a dream. Every man got to have a dream, and so every politician, every elected official, every candidate has a dream. But what about this reality? 72 Republicans, 27 Democrats. How do you get things done when you're outnumbered nearly 3-1?
I don't believe that number is going to remain the same. I know that there are some seats across the state that are being supported and working really hard to have flipped. I know that there is a lot of women who are running in rural counties that have usually just been, they're going to be Republican seats. No one would challenge them. And so I'm excited to see the movement that's taking place across the state. But I think what we have to remember is that the people who represent us are people too, and that the issues that they care about are usually the same. They are just framed differently. And so we all want our students to have quality education. That should not be a bipartisan issue. That should, a partisan issue. We should be able to have conversations about how do we actually make sure our students have good public schools. We should be able to have conversations and actually pass legislation about expanding Medicaid. We do not want Tennesseans to die because they don't have the health care coverage that they need and that they deserve. We should not have to make decisions about whether or not the juvenile justice system or the criminal justice system unfairly incarcerates children or people of color, when they are all members of our communities. And so I think when we're able to just get to the basics of why we are there, then you can get some things done. We have seen some Republicans this last cycle come pass, or at least start crafting legislation around healthcare and getting us in the path to that. We've seen some Republicans talk about public education and start supporting those things. But I think we just have to remember that all of our communities want for our children to be successful. We want Tennesseans across the state to have good quality lives. And that if we keep that in the forefront of our mind, that we'll be able to get some things done that reflects that, as opposed to reflecting the tags that we have attached to our name.
Okay. Well, let's shift gears again. Let's talk about economic growth in District 84. Tell us about the district and where you see the current rate of growth and your thoughts on that.
There is a tremendous amount of opportunity for economic growth in District 84, particularly in the Hickory Hills, South Riverdale area. Um, for those who do not know, in 2008, tornadoes hit the Hickory Hill Mall and it was not revitalized after that. It currently is owned by one of the churches out here, but we have, after that, we saw a lot of businesses leave the community. So we don't have um, really any economic growth happening out here in the ways that we did maybe 20 plus years ago. We have lost grocery stores, as you said. We've seen Kroger move out in a lot of different places. We've seen some staples of our communities close. And it's really disheartening to see the lack of investment that's happening in District 84. There are literally vacant office buildings up and down Winchester, regardless of what part of Winchester you're on, whether that is near the airport or whether that is out here in Southeast Memphis. There's just a lot of emptiness. And to me, that says that our community is declining. When you don't have people moving about the community, when you don't see investment, when you don't have shops, when you don't have restaurants, when you don't have anyone willing to take a chance or even believe that this is a community worth um, having their business in, then you start to feel like maybe this is not a place that I want to live. And so, economic growth is also tied to whether or not people are going to buy homes in the communities. It is tied to the schools that we have. And, we want people to be able to live, work, and play here, but we don't have the play part. And so without that, we can expect for District 84 to thrive at all. We have the unfortunate burden of having to go to Olive Branch or Carterville when we're looking to shop in a variety of places. So I think it's really important for us to figure out how to coalition build one amongst our representation here locally, but also to figure out how we're going to ask and demand for more investment here in our district, because we know that it can be done. We've seen what coalition building looks like when you have people investing in your community, like in Orange Mound or like in Raleigh Fraser. We know that with the right representation that you can have economic growth and that it can be positive for your community. And so I would love to see that happen.
Okay. Well, as we prepare for our really big question, which will be our last question, we'll give you one more, two more lightning round questions. The first one is, what are your thoughts on the legalization of cannabis in Tennessee?
I think it's yes, we get to a place of where we legalize cannabis. I think we have to decriminalize it first, because there's so much work that we have to do on the back end for those who have already been incarcerated or convicted for, possession of cannabis or whatever their penalty or fine was for having cannabis, in their vicinity or paraphernalia or whatever it might have been. That we have to decriminalize that and take care of those people first. But I also know that the legalization of cannabis can be good for business. In places like Colorado, it is how they are funding education. It is a business. And what I would like to see as we try and figure out the legalization of cannabis here in Tennessee is that Black and brown people are included in that process. I think often what happens is that, something that used to be illegal becomes legal, and then only white people have access to it. I think we absolutely have to be inclusive in how we're going to legalize this, and then who has access to, the business opportunities that comes along with the legalization of cannabis. I do think that it has to be mandated, and we have to, structure it in a way so that it is protected and that, children don't have access to it. I think, it absolutely should be legalized for medicinal purposes, that we are behind the ball for that. We know that that does help with chronic pain and fatigue and a couple of other things as it relates to cancer and some other chronic illnesses that we have the ability to do it, but Tennessee is always late when it comes to being progressive in terms of things like cannabis.
Okay. Well, uh, before we get to our big one at the end, let me ask, are there any plans to propose new legislation if you are elected as the next state representative for District 84?
As much as I would like to say yes, I'm going to say I don't have any immediate plans to propose new legislation. I think that when I'm elected, there is going to be a huge learning curve, and I want to take the time to learn properly. And then, if there is a need for new legislation that comes out of my district or from colleagues, I'm happy to support it. I'm happy to help craft it. I'm happy to propose it, but here today, I don't know what that legislation would need to be. I just know that District 84 needs someone who's going to be transparent and accountable to them. And for right now, that is my commitment.
All righty. I like that sober thinking. Okay. Well, here is our big question, and we ask this of each guest on the show, and that is to give us a SWOT analysis of District 84. Tell us, what you think the greatest strength is, the same for weaknesses, biggest opportunity, and single biggest threat to the district moving from where it is today to where it can be tomorrow.
I think our biggest strength is the people of District 84. District 84 is filled with a lot of resilient people who want to see the communities that they initially bought into to thrive again. I see them demanding that. I hear them. I have met some of them at the polls. I have talked to many on the phone, and I think that's often what gets lost in this process is that the people are who we represent and that's where your strength comes from. And I'm so excited to see that they're utilizing the most powerful thing that they have this year in voting.
All right. Well, everyone, you've heard from the lady herself, Miss Dominique Primer. She is running for Tennessee House of Representatives for District 84. So make sure you take some time to visit her website at www.dominiqueprimer.com. You can find her on Facebook at facebook.com/primer for TN84, twitter.com/primer for TN84. You could do the same on Instagram. She's everywhere. Primer for TN84. And before we allow Ms. Primer to have the last word, I'm going to share a quick piece of information for you. And then, Ms. Primer, you can close us out by telling the people why you deserve their vote and bidding them adieu for the rest of their day. Fair enough?
Yep.
All righty. So, voters, viewers, listen, everyone can make a difference. And one vote can be the difference. So make sure you get out to vote. Try to early vote if you can. And if you can't do early voting, get out on election day and make sure you vote. Make sure you mask up, double mask up if you can, t-shirt, mask, and another mask, however you can, but be safe in the process. And I want to remind you of this. The deadline to have your request for an absentee ballot in the hands of the Election Commission is July 30th. So that means you can't mail it on July 30th. You've missed the deadline. It's not a postmark deadline. It's a possession deadline. It needs to be in their hands. So if you want to vote by absentee ballot and you haven't requested it, I know you may feel like it defeats the purpose, but you need to get out and go and do it in person. That's the best way to ensure that you're covered and that you get your absentee ballot. And then if you already have your absentee ballot, listen, send it now. Don't wait until August 5th to mail your absentee ballot. Don't wait until August 1st if you have it now. Don't wait until tomorrow. Do it today and send that ballot in so that it can be counted on election day. And with my final remark, I will say this. Our civic duties do not stop at voting responsibly. They extend to participating in the U.S. Census Survey. Our participation in that survey will ensure that our district lines are drawn fairly and that all the resources available from our federal government for the state of Tennessee and for Shelby County actually reaches the communities that make up the city of Memphis and Shelby County. We need those resources so that we can be adequately prepared to move forward in the best way possible. So we all have to do this. Let's come to our senses and take the census. All right. So and now we'll have Ms. Dominique Primer do what we would call in church the benediction. So go ahead and close us out.
Well, I would just like to say thank you for having me today. It is always a pleasure to talk about the needs of the community as I see it, and then to hopefully be able to serve the people of District 84 in whatever capacity that they choose. I am a servant leader. And so, should I be your elected state representative for District 84, I am committed to putting power back into our community, to being a voice that we have lacked for so many years, and to make sure that I am accountable to you. And so I ask that if you have not voted, that you make every plan that you can to get out and vote on August 6th, and to make sure that you utilize the power that you have in that vote. It is the most precious thing that you have in this democracy.
All right. So you've heard it from Ms. Dominique Primer, candidate for Tennessee House of Representatives for District 84. Thank you so much for being our guest today. And we bid you a farewell and good luck. Be safe on the campaign trail. And above all things, keep up the fight. So thank you.